Hi, Misfits. This is Kevin.
And this is Kate.
Welcome to Horrorwood.
Ambie nominated
Horrorwood podcast best indie host or hosts category.
I'm so excited.
I am too. That's amazing.
So if you guys don't follow us on social media, first off, why
what
not?
The fuck? Get over there to @Horrorwood podcast on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook.
You know all the things. We got nominated for an Ambie Award for Best Indie Podcast Host, which is so exciting. There are a lot of people that I've heard of that are nominated.
I know. I looked through that nominee list and I was like, holy fuck.
Yeah, it's awesome. And it's hosted by Tig Notaro.
I love Tig Notaro.
And it's going to be here in Chicago, so we don't have to pay for a flight or anything.
Yes, at McCormick Place.
Which you're so excited about.
I've always wanted to go to McCormick Place.
I love it. So it's so exciting. If you happen to be a member of the Podcast Academy, check us out. And if you really like us, maybe throw a vote our way because we could use it.
100%.
In other exciting news, we have a new Misfit Murderino.
We do.
Jessica Phillip.
Hey, Jessica Phillip. What
Jessica,
up?
thank you so much for signing up on our Patreon. We so appreciate it because we need all the support that we can get right now.
Jessica's the best, let me just say.
She absolutely is. I know that without ever having met her. I just know.
I know, too. I feel it in my bones.
Feel the vibe.
My heart. My water jug.
His gallon water jug.
Oh, I love this thing. I've got peach-flavored electrolyte solution.
Aren't you fancy?
Delicious.
All I have is plain water because, guys, the milk frother on our espresso machine broke.
So it's just not steaming?
It's just not. It makes a really bad sound. It's like boom, boom, boom.
Is it under warranty?
I don't know. We've had it for a couple of months, but Matt was already he's like, that thing's going back. This can't be. I was like, yeah.
No.
It's very sad. So that's the news around here.
I joked to Kate when you text me that. I was like, you should wrap it in a blanket and run into Starbucks and be like, help my baby. Fix it.
I laughed out loud when you sent that to me.
Oh, actually, I'll save it for Crime Couch.
You know what? I don't know if we're going to do a Crime Couch. Oh, we might do it for Europe. Well, we might do it for your episode.
Okay.
Tell us now. I want to know. What is it?
Oh, I was going to talk to you about the shorts I went to see for the Oscars.
Yeah. Crime Couch.
Crime Couch. That's what I thought.
You know what? My charger fell out. Hold on a sec.
Kate just banged her head on the microphone.
Everything's going great, guys.
Everything is awesome. Isn't that song from the Lego movie?
Yes, and I after I saw that movie, I sing it over and over.
What's stuck in my head is the Abracadabra song from Lady Gaga.
Yeah, you've been all about that.
I've just been like, Abracadabra, mama. I don't even know all the words.
You don't need to.
Nope.
Okay, let me readjust everything. Okay, we're back.
We're ready. We're feeling it. Kate's wearing an ombre hoodie that's beautiful.
Thank you. Here we go. A few weeks ago, when I was looking for a case to do for this episode, I came across the name Gary DeVore on some listicle. And I was like, that name's not familiar. So I did a cursory Google search and was like, okay, this doesn't seem like it's going to consume my every waking minute for the next few weeks. Easy peasy. You'd think I'd have learned by now that whenever I think that, I think it's going to be easy, it's going to be the opposite. This case is a complicated one, and I have gone down no less than 17 rabbit holes of information. So this is going to be a two-parter, a three-parter, maybe a three-parter.
I thought we were going to go maybe a four-parter. And I was like, Kate, maybe we do an offshoot podcast?
No, I can get it in three. I wanted to get it in two, but there's a lot of background information, and it's not just you're going to hear me talk a lot about his relationships, his career. it's not just because I want you to get to know who he was, which I do, but it all comes back, if you know what I'm saying. So it's good you need that background to get into the meat of the case. And I wanted to get up to a certain point in part 1. And as I was writing it, I was like, I just don't think I can get there in part 1. Like, I think it's a whole other episode. So that's why I'm probably doing 3 parts. In the early morning hours of Saturday, June 28th, 1997, screenwriter Gary DeVore called his wife Wendy from the road. He was on a long drive back to the home they shared in Carpinteria, California, having spent the last few days in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where he was finishing up his latest screenplay, a remake of the 1949 film The Big Steal. During the phone call, he let her know he was about 3 hours away and should be home around 4 a.m. Then shortly after he hung up the phone, Gary DeVore vanished. Never to be heard from again.
Ever?
Ever.
Was The Big Steal Steal or Steel?
Steal. Great question.
Just questions.
Good ones. Great ones. His disappearance sparked a slew of conspiracy theories, including a possible kidnapping, murder by the Russian mafia, an alien abduction, because why not? A government cover-up with ties to the CIA, and the age-old reasoning of maybe he just wanted to get away and start a new life.
Whoa, this is insane.
This case involves a cast of eccentric characters that we'll meet in these next couple of episodes, among them celebrities, government officials, an Oscar-nominated actress, a documentary producer whose research into this case sends his personal life into a tailspin.
Oh no, don't let it take you down.
Multiple ex-wives and lovers. And a Playgirl model turned publicist turned cheesecake entrepreneur turned self-proclaimed undercover CIA operative.
Who that is?
We'll get there.
That's my husband. Based on those 4 things.
Okay.
Playgirl model, cheesecake eater, or maker. Publicist. And the last thing.
Undercover CIA
Thank you.
operative, self-proclaimed.
Hey.
So those are just a few.
Fake it till you make it.
Of the characters. And at the center of it all is our man of the hour, Gary DeVore. Gary Martin DeVore was born in Los Angeles on September 17th, 1941. He grew up in LA. His dad, David, was a contractor in Beverly Hills, so he was born and raised there. Mm-hmm. He was a tough guy, not tough like, oh, I'm going to fuck you up. Not like that.
Kate, that was scary.
Well, he wasn't that scary.
Kate raised her fist to me. No, I'm just kidding.
He was tough in the sense that he could hold his own. Okay. Rugged is probably a good word to describe him. He's not what you might think of when you think of someone born and raised in LA. He was the cowboy type. Ooh. Loved to ride horses. You are loving him already.
We talk about cowboys all the time.
He loved to ride horses. He wore a lot of denim shirts and cowboy hats. Spoke with a bit of a twang in his voice.
Little lady, little man.
I think he was maybe sexier than that.
That wasn't sexy? God damn it.
I like the shock on your face. That wasn't sexy?
That's why I can't get anyone to date me. I have to try new lines.
Or maybe don't do a fake twang accent if that's how you introduce yourself.
They're like, Kevin, get out.
Once in high school, while playing football, he got injured and broke the pinky on his right finger, so it kind of jutted out to the side at a right angle.
Oh.
He declined to have it repaired because he thought it made him look kind of badass.
A right ankle's like that, isn't it?
Well, yeah, you can't even make your finger go that far.
Oh.
Knocking shit over.
I was trying to break my own pinky.
Well, don't.
That's so far out.
Yeah. It was a great conversation starter. Like, what happened to your hand? Oh, this whole thing? It's just an old injury. He thought it was really sexy, and women agreed. He did not have any trouble getting the ladies.
Okay. I don't know about that.
Now Kevin's less enthused.
I'm less attracted.
Were you at the theater the night? See, I know you weren't working box office the night, but when the guy tripped up the stairs and broke his finger?
I was not there, but I heard all about it.
Kevin, it was awful.
I know. Didn't he like put it up on the desk and was like, well, I broke the damn thing.
Yes. So this poor man who's quite a bit older, he trips up these stairs, which honestly it was the stairs' fault because they weren't
Those
even.
stairs were awful.
Yeah, awful. And when he emerged, I think it was his middle finger, was bent completely backwards.
Oh my God.
And just like stuck there. And he goes up. I was house managing that night. Cheyenne was running box office. And so she's behind the desk and he goes up and he puts it on the counter and just kind of like flunks it down. He goes, well, I think I broke the damn thing. And I thought Cheyenne was going to vomit. She was like, oh. And I'm like, it's okay. It's okay. We just have to like fill out some paperwork. And I kept saying, I was like, we need you to go to the hospital because there was a hospital a block away. He refused. And his wife was like, maybe go. He's like, no. Like he really wanted to see this show, I guess. So they go to their seats and they sit down.
My God.
And I was so uncomfortable. I was like, I can't have this guy sit through the show. Like, who knows what's going to happen? Like, he needs to go. Mm-hmm. And I go back in and I go up to them and I'm like, so it would really make me feel better if you go to the hospital. We will comp you for another performance. Like, you're going to get to see the show. For the love of God. The top part of your finger is no longer attached to the bottom part of your finger. Just go. It was awful. But anyway, this story reminded me of that because Gary's finger is like at a right angle.
Oh, you did it real well.
Well, maybe I have weird hands. I don't know.
No, Kate, that's a skill.
Is it?
There we go.
Finger injury and all, Gary was off to college. But according to an article in the LA Times, in 1961, he dropped out and joined the Army. I will say in a Jet magazine article announcing his first marriage, it states he graduated from USC. I think he might have attended USC, but I don't think he graduated.
Last thing about the fingers, I'm so sorry. But I imagine myself going to a bar and like I have those fake like dinosaur claw hands.
Amazing.
And I'm like, hi boys.
But you say it in a twang.
Hi boys. And everyone's like, yikes, call the police. Sorry, that's the end of that. Continue with Gary DeVore's college life.
Well, he dropped out. So
on to the next venture.
So he joined the Army. When he got out of the Army, he worked as a truck driver for a while, driving hundreds, if not thousands, of miles across the country. All those hours behind the wheel gave him plenty of time to think.
About what?
What he thought about is how he'd really like to be a writer. A friend of his had contacts in the entertainment industry, not unusual when you've lived in LA your whole life, which is how he got hired to write questions for the Newlywed Game, which sounds like the perfect entry-level job, really, if you want to write for TV, because it's low stakes. You're literally just writing questions, which were very cheeky for that show. It was like, what's something your ex does better than your spouse? Like it was those kind of questions.
Yeah, I've seen episodes of that show.
Sure. And you're working in television, so you're making those professional contacts that can help propel you to the next level. And one of the contacts Gary made during this time was with the Newlywed Game show producer, Chuck Barris. Some outlets report that Gary wrote for the dating game, so you might come across that if you're looking into this case. Chuck Barris produced both shows. Barris was a successful game show producer, though less comfortable in front of the camera. When he hosted The Gong Show in the 70s, he was this goofy, sort of over-the-top character that just got wilder as the show went on. During his career, he earned the nicknames the King of Schlock and the Baron of Bad Taste. But it's perhaps his claims of being an assassin for the CIA that are the most attention-grabbing.
I mean, Baron of Bad Taste sounds like a John Waters title.
Maybe.
But CIA, whoa.
CIA assassin.
Assassin?
In the early 80s, Barris wrote a book titled Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, where he details his work as a hired hitman in the 60s and 70s. The book was turned into a movie nearly 2 decades later with Sam Rockwell playing Chuck Barris, directed by George Clooney. It was Clooney's directorial debut, actually.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That made me think of that Michelle Pfeiffer movie,
Dangerous Minds.
Been spending most, and she's wearing the leather jacket.
Most critics are quick to dismiss his claims that he ever worked for the CIA, and the CIA denies that Barris ever worked for the agency. In 1984, the same year the book was released, Barris went on the Today Show and said, quote, "No, I was never a CIA hitman. I never did those things. I once applied for the CIA, and while I was going through the process, I got a job and went on television. But I'd always wondered what would have happened if I had done both." So his CIA claims appear to be false. However, Andrew Lazar, a producer on the film version of Confessions of a Dangerous Mind and a close friend of Barris who saw him regularly throughout his life, told The Hollywood Reporter that Barris never backed down from his claims in all the years he knew him and never denied the authenticity of his book. So that's just a little side story I thought I'd throw in here because I found it interesting, especially with what happens later to our friend Gary.
Interesting. I feel like that's weird to me. That's a weird thing.
It is kind of odd.
Like this game show host, and then he's like, I was an assassin for the CIA.
I mean, part of me thinks like maybe he just wanted to have
attention,
this fantasy life, like
maybe,
you know.
And he touted it as like a autobiography.
Yes.
Okay.
And part of what he said was he used the prizes on Newlywed Game, which were like vacations, sometimes different places, as ways for him to travel to do his CIAing.
Oh, yes.
So it's just kind of like an interesting, fun, weird side story. While still in the early days of his entertainment career, DeVore met his first wife, Maria, in March of 1969. He was working as a producer on a popular talk show called Tempo. Maria used to co-host the show prior to Gary's tenure there, and this one week in March, she just happened to be making a guest appearance. Maria was a well-known figure in her own right. She'd had a career as a jazz singer and worked with some incredible musicians, including Duke Ellington, and had released a few solo albums.
She wasn't a Ziegfeld Follies girl.
You know what? She wasn't a Follies girl, but she's still cool
like
anyways. By the time Gary met her, she also had the distinction of being the widow of Nat King Cole.
Go!
Maria Cole and Gary DeVore had a whirlwind courtship. They met in March of 1969, and that summer announced they'd be getting married in October. She just couldn't resist that deformed finger.
I was going to say, she was like a right angle. Sign me the fuck up.
You sounded like Jennifer Coolidge there just now. This was Maria's third marriage. Her first husband was killed during a routine training flight at the end of World War II.
Oh, shit.
It was the first marriage for Gary. He was 28 years old, 19 years Maria's junior.
Whoa.
She was 47. For some reason, an article in Jet magazine lists her age as 42 and his is 32. Not sure why, unless the couple was trying to close the age gap so that maybe it wasn't as big of a headline.
Sure.
Or maybe the journalist just didn't have the facts straight. I don't know. But they made headlines regardless because not only was she very famous at the time, but he was white and she was black. Mm-hmm. This was the 1960s. Their marriage came just a couple of years after Loving versus Virginia, in which the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that banning interracial marriage was unlawful. So this marriage would have definitely had people talking. They had a small ceremony at a church in L.A., but then a lavish reception with 350 guests held at Maria's mansion she and Nat had purchased together in the affluent Hancock Park neighborhood. Among the guests were celebrities Edward G. Robinson, Danny Thomas, and Milton Berle. I had to mention Milton Berle because he comes up in the SNL episode I'm working on for Patreon. Wild. It was a fancy schmancy evening, and after homecoming, that's not it.
After homecoming.
After honeymooning in New York, the couple settled into the Hancock Park mansion. I'm really fascinated by their relationship because at the time, although Gary worked pretty steadily, he wasn't making much money. I mean, he's writing for TV.
Yeah.
He wasn't a household name. She had money and invested it well. She was a good businesswoman. He was a young, up-and-coming guy in his 20s, never been married, no kids. By marrying Maria, he instantly became a stepdad to her 5 children.
Whoa, 5 baby kids.
Yes. I think Natalie Cole was 19 at the time they got married, so he was only 9 years older than his oldest stepdaughter.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of wild. Their wedding came 4 years after Nat King Cole died of cancer, and I think it's safe to say Nat was Maria's one true love. I don't think she ever stopped loving him. Gary seemed to struggle living in the home his new wife had once shared with Nat King Cole. Those are big shoes to fill. Plus, there are all these kids running around. Gary found it difficult to concentrate there, and he had a hard time writing. There was a property in Tyringham, Massachusetts, that Gary and Maria had come across while traveling. It was located in the Berkshires, and Gary felt that the quiet atmosphere would be more conducive to his work.
Okay.
Maria was from Boston originally, so the idea of returning to Massachusetts wasn't necessarily a huge jump, so the couple agreed to move there. Maria sold the LA mansion, packed up the kids, and they all headed east. The property sat on a 111-acre estate.
That's pretty big.
Big old property. The house had 13 rooms, several fireplaces, a heated pool, a barn and stable, which of course Gary loved, a tennis court, and there was a guest cottage as well as a caretaker's house on the property.
So there are plenty of quiet places for him to go and
he
write.
can go duck into a little corner in one of the many rooms and close off the world.
That's interesting. I'm assuming he's writing by hand or typewriter.
He had a computer. Oh,
70s,
I'm thinking
60s?
about
later
when he had the computer.
It'd probably be hard with your messed up finger to write with a pen
Maybe
or
it was a
pencil.
typewriter at the time.
Maybe he was left-handed.
The house came with a caretaker who had worked for the previous owners and decided to stay on when Maria and Gary moved in.
That's like the beginning of like a scary ghost
It does
story.
sound kind of like a horror movie a little bit.
They're like, oh yes, welcome to the estate. My name's Carol.
Well, it was a male, and I think his name was Lucien.
Lucien.
Which is even scarier.
Did he have like a masshole accent? Ha! I'm not gonna try it.
Don't.
I'm Lucien.
I like how you said I'm not going to try it, and then you tried it.
I did try it. I can't do a mass accent. Let's continue.
Sure. Maria did the decorating in the house, and of course she has all the memorabilia from Nat King Cole, all these valuable antiques she had purchased with him during their travels, including a Waterford crystal chandelier, a phone booth from the Queen Mary. Obviously, she's not going to leave all that stuff behind. She brought it with her to furnish the new house. So Gary, despite having moved all the way across the country, is still living in Nat King Cole's shadow.
Then it was haunted because you have a phone booth from the Queen Mary in your house.
Right?
Bitch, you got ghosts.
I think this probably played it, not the ghost. I think the fact that it was all Nat King Cole stuff probably played a huge factor in the downfall of their marriage. Gary and Maria were together for several years before separating in 1976.
Oh no.
And divorcing in 1978. Maria continued living in the house in the Berkshires, and Gary moved back to Los Angeles. He had to move in with his dad, though, because he had no money. Maria never remarried, nor did she talk about Gary much after the divorce, aside from a 1981 interview in Ebony magazine where she said, quote, "Gary is a very fine man in many ways, but our marriage just didn't work out as we had expected." Years later, in 1994, she mentioned him in an interview with the New York Times, referring to him only as her third husband, who was, quote, "a writer who didn't like living in Nat King Cole's shoes."
I think that says it all.
She declined to name him in that article, which I just thought was interesting because she
my
named
third
him before.
husband. That's weird. Yes.
Yes.
We get it. He was insecure.
Sounds like it.
And that little finger couldn't help him.
You know, I say it sounds like it. I don't know if he was insecure or just restless and wanted to be the main focus. I'm not sure.
Maybe he wanted the most success of his successor. Like he wanted to be just as successful as Nat King Cole.
Yeah, I do think there was maybe some of that in there. Also, Maria and Nat King Cole were a very famous couple,
Yeah.
like even together, not just with Nat, but like she as well. And so, you know, he marries into this like very famous establishment's not the right word, but you know what I'm saying.
I know exactly what you mean.
And part of me feels like, okay, well, maybe he was, attracted to that. But then once he got into the reality of it, was like, maybe I don't love this so much.
Was there a lot of press around their relationship?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, wait, of Gary and Maria.
Gary and Maria.
Oh, yeah, because it was a big deal. He was white.
Right.
She was black.
Yeah. So
People
they were
went
getting
nuts.
attention.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
But I don't know if it was necessarily...
Good attention.
It wasn't that it was negative per se. It was just the main focus was always on Maria.
Maria, and then like them being racially different.
Yes.
Okay, so maybe, well, that can also be a little...
Yeah, it was always, his name was always connected in terms of like marrying Nat King Cole's widow, moving into Nat King Cole's mansion. Yeah.
Taking care of Nat King Cole's kids.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it doesn't sound like he kept up any relationship with the kids after the divorce. Despite his personal life being in a bit of a shambles, his writing career began picking up. In 1980, he got his first big screen credit as one of the writers on the film The Dogs of War, which starred a young Christopher Walken and Tom Berenger. His next film to make it to the big screen was Backroads, starring Sally Field, who we got to see, and Tommy Lee Jones, that came out in 1981.
I'm currently looking at a signed copy of Sally Field's autobiography in pieces that Kate and I went to the music box to see.
That was so fun, but that book is rough. Woof. Gary and Tommy Lee Jones had become good friends, so much so that when Tommy got married in May of 1981, he asked just two men to stand up at his wedding, his cousin and Gary DeVore.
Oh.
Just a few months prior to Tommy's wedding, Gary had a wedding of his own. He married his second wife, actress Sandy Newton, on Valentine's Day, 1981.
Sandy Newton. That name sounds familiar.
She was an actress back in the day, but she is now, if she still is, at least she was like as of a couple of years ago, a news anchor, I believe, in Palm Springs.
Whoa.
Yeah, so she kind of switched careers. But
all right.
That marriage didn't last, and they divorced in 1985, which is when Gary began dating Janet Jackson. Oh, I thought you were going to say something.
I don't know if I can.
You're so happy about
Janet Jackson?
Yeah. Gary had a lot of lovers during his life, though it doesn't sound like he ever cheated on them. By all accounts, he was faithful during his marriages, and even when a relationship ended, he often remained friends with the woman. Even after he and Sandy divorced, they still kept in contact through the years.
Okay. How long were they married?
81 to 85, so about 4 years.
Okay.
Or just under, yeah.
And then after that, he starts dating Janet?
Mm-hmm.
Whoa.
Yeah, I think it was brief, but still. One relationship that went from lovers to friends and lasted through his life is with Julia Phillips, who has the distinction of being the first female producer to win an Oscar for Best Picture. She won for producing The Sting, starring Robert Redford and Paul Newman. She also produced Taxi Driver, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead.
Whoa.
Unfortunately, her cocaine addiction ended her career. But she wrote a book titled You'll Never Eat Lunch in This Town Again, which is kind of like a Hollywood tell-all. And in it, she talks about her relationship with Gary. She describes him as a big drinker who speaks with, quote, a Western twang and a voice laced heavy with testosterone.
Oh.
Kevin, that sounded explicit.
I was. Can I look up a picture of him real quick?
Yeah. She goes on to say he was a talented writer who feels he hasn't gotten his due and is marching into middle age with bitterness and rancor. So not the greatest description. Oh, Kevin just found his picture.
Yes.
Well, now we all know what Kevin's type is.
No. I'm sorry to like sexualize him, but men, I'm taking it the other direction, honey. I don't know.
What's that mean?
I don't know. Forget it. But yeah, he's a hot guy.
He's a good looking guy and with like a deep kind of like sexy Western flair. The two of them were working together on a movie called Wish You Were Here with Kathleen Turner set to star.
I saw Kathleen Turner live.
Really?
At the Broadway Playhouse.
Ooh.
Like before COVID. She was doing a one-woman show.
Amazing.
And singing. She's not a singer.
All I can think about is the Friends episode where she did like a musical review, and because she played a trans woman in that. And I think she sang It's Raining Men, and then she had like all these backup dancers. So that's my knowledge of her singing.
Yeah, I was literally a few rows from her, and she's fabulous. Don't get me wrong. I am not
Of course.
diminishing Kathleen Turner. I
No.
would never.
You couldn't.
But her stories were fantastic. It was fun/funny because she would kind of sit on a stool, and it was very like jazz lounge piano, and she would sort of sing because she has such a deep voice. She could get away with it.
Yeah.
And she was like, I'm gonna go, like that kind of thing.
I love it. I would have paid to see
Spencer
it.
and I went to see it, and we walked out like, what was that? But also amazing.
So yeah, they were excited to have Kathleen Turner on board. Gary had written the screenplay, and Julia was to produce the film, but they weren't able to get any buyers to greenlight it, and the project never went anywhere. Despite that little setback, at this time in the mid-'80s, Gary's career is heating up. 2 of his movies were released in 1986, Raw Deal starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, which didn't do great at the box office, but that wasn't the fault of Gary, and Running Scared starring Billy Crystal and Gregory Hines. His niche was action comedy.
Yeah, it was.
He had also just taken the job as production chief at the newly incorporated De Laurentiis Entertainment Group, or DEG. DEG was the brainchild of producer Dino De Laurentiis. It didn't last long, producing maybe a couple dozen movies that all bombed, including Gary's Raw Deal. But the company's downfall was really only the fault of Dino himself. He ran it poorly, he refused to listen to the advice of others, and he declined to dedicate much money towards marketing. Raw Deal should have been huge. Arnold Schwarzenegger was a big box office draw at the time, and even met with Dino over concerns that there wasn't much advertising surrounding the release of the film. But Dino was just like, yeah, I don't want to pay for that. He's like, here's a flyer. Go tape it to a lamppost. Yeah.
That's insane. That's poor business management.
And it showed. The company went under after a couple of years.
Bye-bye.
When Gary and Julia Phillips teamed up to make his movie Tracks, Gary's next movie, they wanted her to come in for a meeting with Dino. She didn't want to deal with him. She knew he was kind of a skis, but she went. She didn't really have a choice. And Dino just steamrolls her in the meeting, tries to get her to accept less money, basically treats her as less than. So she goes to Gary's office to vent, and he kind of just shrugged her off. Shortly after that, when Julia pissed off Dino's daughter, Rafaela, Dino refused to hire her as a producer. She was pissed, but what really made her angry is that Gary didn't stand up for her. So he says to her, look, let me take you to Morton's to talk. Morton's Steakhouse, which at the time, it was one of the places to dine.
Is it a chain?
It is. So when they meet, she says to Gary, I'm not surprised. This is a quote. I'm not surprised your great scripts turn into shitty movies if this is all the balls you have. And then she called him some derogatory names, and he was really hurt. Though apparently they did make up quickly because she lists him in the acknowledgments section of her book and says he's one of her role models. So I think they did have a friendly, love. I mean, they were lovers at one point briefly.
Of course they were.
But
how can't you be?
But I think they kind of, not a love-hate, that's not what I mean, but they made up quickly if they had an argument.
I mean, in some ways that can be a good thing. You can lay out all your shit out on the table.
Exactly.
And then still kind of go on with your relationship and friendship without, taking it too personally.
Yes.
She walks in and has like a full beard and a broken finger, and she's like, he was my role model.
So Kevin, have you had coffee today?
I had a little bit.
Oh, okay. Because sometimes when you don't have coffee is when you're really...
Weird. I'm sorry.
I love it.
My eyes just start rolling around in my head.
Never change. The next year, DEG went out of business. Gary ended up producing Tracks himself, but it was never released theatrically. I think it got a video release. His next project and next wife were on a movie for CBS Summer Playhouse called The Heat. Claudia Christian was a 23-year-old actress playing the love interest in the movie, written by Gary. And in her book, Babylon Confidential, she describes him as, quote, a confident, charismatic man in his late 40s who'd walk around the set in jeans and cowboy boots. However, she would also soon learn that he was not very demonstrative, just kind of closed off, and he had a short fuse.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. They had a little showmance during filming. They weren't dating. They were just sleeping with each other.
Fucking. No, I'm kidding. Sorry.
I mean, that is what it was. Once filming wrapped, they said their goodbyes, kind of like, that was fun, peace out.
Sure.
Claudia was no stranger to a casual Hollywood affair. One of her most high-profile lovers was none other than Dodi Fayed, who will forever be linked to Princess Diana.
Princess Diana, Dodi.
Claudia met Dodi when she was just 18 years old. She describes him as charming and romantic. He pursued her pretty aggressively, and they dated for a while, traveling around Europe together, flying in private jets, driving around in fancy cars. It seemed attractive to her at first, but he came from a lot of power and money. They had to have bodyguards with them all the time. His dad was very Egyptian and clung to traditional beliefs that women were meant to become wives and mothers. Their place was in the home. And while there have been advancements when it comes to women's rights there, gender discrimination still exists. Claudia was bored. She knew that that was not the lifestyle she wanted, so their relationship ended. For the time being. They remained friends for the next couple of decades, however, and whenever she was in London, she'd always call Dodi up and spend time with him. Then randomly one evening, she gets a call. Only it wasn't Dodi calling her. It was Gary. This was after their showmance had already come and gone, but he calls her up and they're chatting. He's like, what are you up to these days? And Claudia says, well, I'm auditioning, working. In a few weeks, I'm going to Canada to visit a friend of mine. Gary says, great, I'll come with you and we can get hitched. And Claudia goes, are you serious?
What?
And he said, sure. So 6 weeks later, Claudia and her roommate, Lana Clarkson, yes, that Lana Clarkson, traveled to Vancouver where they met up with Gary and Claudia's friend Christine, who was the friend she was originally planning to visit in Canada. Christine planned everything for the wedding. She was a locations manager, so it was like,
oh, she was like, I'm on it.
She's like, yeah, I got this. But the marriage was doomed from the start.
Oh, no shit.
In the limo on the way to the yacht where the ceremony was to be held, Gary and Claudia did a bunch of tequila shots. According to Claudia, everyone at the wedding was high on cocaine and alcohol. They didn't even know some of the people in the wedding party. The whole thing was kind of thrown together. And Lana Clarkson went up to the yacht captain and asked to see the marriage certificate, and she signed her name as the maid of honor without telling Claudia. Claudia's friend Christine was supposed to be the maid of honor. Then at one point, while everyone's celebrating and having a good time, Lana comes in crying and complaining how no one would ever want to marry her, la la la. So according to Claudia, Lana just tried to make the wedding all about herself and created quite a spectacle. So they had a huge falling out.
This is top tier drama.
It is.
This is insane.
Things are already going awry.
I love that he just calls her up out of the blue and is like, okay, girl, we're getting married in Canada on a yacht with some cocaine and tequila.
She's like, aye.
And then she's like, well, the dick was that good. So I guess I got to go and do this. I don't understand. I mean, I do, but I don't.
I think because she's sober now. She went through a huge period in her life.
She was on drugs.
She was very much on drugs.
Okay, never mind. That
she
explains
was
everything.
Going through a lot. After the ceremony, Gary says to Claudia, this is a quote, according to her, "Isn't it funny that we're married? You're not my type at all. I like leggy blondes with big tits." Not exactly what you want to hear from your groom. Also, remember, he was married to Maria Cole and dated Janet Jackson. So I don't think you have a type, sir. I think you just like women.
Sweetie. Leggy blondes with big tits? No. That's not your record.
It sure is
I'm changing my mind.
Kevin's losing interest. After the ceremony, everyone migrated to a party held at the home of one of Claudia and Christine's friends. And Christine had invited a male friend that Claudia always had a crush on. Everyone's high. They're all doing cocaine. And when they ran out of drugs, Claudia and this male friend went to get more. They meet up with a group of guys, buy cocaine, do lines with them, get back to the party, then sneak into the bathroom to do more cocaine and make out. while her brand new husband is somewhere in the house. She's still wearing her wedding dress.
Oh my God.
So that's how the marriage began.
Hey, way to start it off with a bang.
Almost right after they wed, Gary received a notice from the IRS stating he was liable for a federal tax deficiency of more than $135,000 and for a negligent return penalty of almost $7,000, all pertaining to Nat King Cole's estate. Additionally, he and Maria Cole were held jointly liable for deficiencies totaling more than $300,000.
That's bananas.
Suddenly, he owed a lot of money unexpectedly. It had to do with when they sold the Hancock Park mansion and bought the place in the Berkshires.
Oh.
He had to fight this through the court system, and it was ongoing throughout his marriage to Claudia.
Wow.
Not surprisingly, he started experiencing writer's block during this time. He would go on long drives by himself to try and clear his head. And I mean long as in thousands of miles, which, having been a truck driver for years, wasn't that out of the ordinary. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He would just tell Claudia, hey, I'm going to take off to Tennessee for a while. So that gives you an idea of the mindset he was in while he was with her. They were already going through a rocky time when just a couple of years into the marriage, Claudia had a miscarriage while on a film set.
Ooh.
She was just 3 months pregnant at the time.
Yikes, no.
After she had healed and recovered, she was determined to bring back the fun in her relationship with Gary like it had been when they first got together while working on that film, The Heat. So she gets dressed in some sexy new lingerie she just purchased. She prepares a nice lunch for him that she arranges on this big platter, and she heads down the hall to the room of their house that he used as his office, trying to inspire a little afternoon delight.
Ah.
You know what I'm saying? She walks in. Gary's on his computer, and she's like, oh, honey, big mistake.
Huge.
I have to go shopping now.
Oh, sorry. I can't. We have to always say this.
I know. He turned toward her, and he was pissed. He screamed, get out. Don't you ever fucking come in here when I'm working. She hired a divorce attorney shortly after that, and they divorced in 1992.
All right, bye. Don't be a fucking asshole, Gary.
Through the early to mid-90s, Gary struggled professionally. Rather than getting his own script to the big screen, he was mainly hired as a script doctor, someone who comes in and makes revisions to what someone else has already written, and this work all went uncredited. Not exactly where he wanted to be in his career at 50-plus years old.
Sure.
One day, Gary was out having a little self-care day, getting his hair cut at the famous Christoph's, the it stylist in Hollywood at the time, which is still around, actually. While Gary was in the chair, he overheard a woman talking to her stylist about her mother being very ill. That woman was Wendy Oates. She was a former model with jet black hair who worked as a voiceover artist and occasionally as a dialogue coach on films.
Dialogue.
It's a dialogue.
Ooh.
In addition to her gigs in the entertainment industry, she ran a plastic surgeon's office in Beverly Hills and was raising a daughter on her own.
Damn.
Wendy came from wealth and privilege and dated some high-profile people, but overall was very independent and headstrong. While they're at the salon, Richard Dreyfuss came in, and Wendy's stylist had to step away to talk with him. At the same time, Gary's haircut was finished and he was about to leave. But first he walks over to Wendy and offered some words of support regarding her mother. He was just like, hey, I heard you saying your mom is sick. I'm really sorry. I know that's tough. And Wendy thought, oh, that's really nice. And she was like, thank you. And then Gary left. But as soon as he got outside, he turned right around and walked back in. He goes up to Wendy and says, this is a quote, I work out of my home and I don't get to meet people very often. I'd really like to get to know you. I'd like to have coffee with you or something. So here's my number. Just call me and I'll make myself available to you. Wendy's stylist was finishing up with her then. So Wendy said, well, why don't we just go have a cup of coffee now? And they were together from that point on.
Wow.
Wendy said she saw no red flags with Gary and she liked the way he made her feel. She was looking for a little excitement in her life. And to her, Gary was really exciting. Oh, Kevin's coming back around.
Here it is. I don't know what's happening.
At that very first coffee, he told her, there's someone you have to meet. So they made a date to have dinner at the Ivy, which is a restaurant people go to in LA to see and be seen.
Have you been?
I've never been.
Should we go? I don't know.
Sure.
What are you doing next week?
And the person that he had Wendy meet was Chuck Barris. Wendy said Barris was very different in person than his game show persona. She said he was really interesting and intelligent, but that the meeting at the Ivy felt strange, like she was being assessed.
Yeah, what?
I mean, I feel like if you bring a new love interest to meet a friend, yeah, you're going to feel like you're being obsessed. You're going to feel like you're being assessed, right? Because this is their friend that they've been friends with for decades.
It's weird. That's weird.
Yeah, she felt it was weird too. And if Wendy was being assessed, apparently she met Barris's approval because she and Gary wed in 1996.
God.
Fourth wife. Things were looking good for Gary. He had a new bride and his career was picking back up. He'd just been hired to write a screenplay for a remake of the 1949 film, The Big Steal. Producers wanted Gary to center the film around the U.S. invasion of Panama. Gary found this concept appealing. He had grown tired of action comedies. It wasn't exactly fulfilling work to him. This was something he could really sink his teeth into. He agreed to work for scale if he could also direct, and the studio agreed. This was going to be his directorial debut, and he was thrilled. He'd been wanting to direct for a long time.
Cool.
The project required him to do a lot of research. This wasn't unusual. He did research for all his films. But this one required him to learn information about the government, possibly classified information. So let me give a brief overview of the events surrounding the U.S. invasion of Panama. History. Here we go. Panama's dictator, Manuel Noriega, had been a paid informant for the CIA from the 1960s into the 1980s. He worked with the U.S. government to restrict illegal drug shipments, but at the same time, he was getting paid by drug dealers to help them launder drug money. Because of Noriega's work with the CIA, these money launderers were protected from being investigated, especially because U.S. officials realized drug money was a great way to fund the Contras. Contras were right-wing militias who sought to overthrow the left-wing Nicaraguan government. Back up a little. During Jimmy Carter's presidency, he had approved a $75 million aid package to Nicaragua. But as soon as Reagan became president, he canceled the remaining payment, and his administration began funding the Contras to overthrow the Nicaraguan government.
Whoa.
The Contras were responsible for countless human rights violations against Nicaraguan civilians, and according to the Global Terrorism Database, they carried out more than 1,300 terrorist attacks.
Oh my God.
When Congress eventually blocked funding to the Contras, Reagan had to find another way to get money and weapons to the terrorist group. One answer to this was to sell weapons to Iran in exchange for money they could then hand over to the Contras. And another way was to traffic cocaine from Colombian cartels into the U.S., where it was converted into crack and sold to black neighborhoods in Los Angeles, the profits of which then went to the Contras.
Oh my God.
And the U.S. government, specifically the CIA, knew this was happening and turned a blind eye, allegedly. When the media found out that Panama's dictator, Manuel Noriega, was involved in drug trafficking, the New York Times ran a piece exposing his activities. This was bad news bears for the U.S. government because they had been working with him for decades, so it wasn't a good look for them. Reagan told Noriega, hey, you should probably step down as leader of Panama. But Noriega was like, nah. So folks at the Pentagon tried to persuade Reagan to invade Panama. However, George Bush was campaigning to be the next president, and Reagan wanted him to win. And it just so happened Bush had served as the CIA director during part of the time Noriega was an informant.
Oh.
They had been good buddies.
They were friends.
So Reagan didn't want to jeopardize Bush's campaign. Relations between the U.S. and Panama continued to deteriorate, and Noriega declared a state of war on the U.S. Bush, now president, we're in 1989, didn't see any other solution other than to invade Panama and take down his old buddy, Manuel Noriega. One of the producers for Gary's film, The Big Steal, gave an interview to the podcast Witnessed Fade to Black. It's an 8-part series on this case that came out in 2023. Highly recommend if you want to really deep dive into this case.
Into Gary DeVore?
Yes.
Okay.
This producer, who requested his name and voice not be used, said, quote, Panama was a cesspool of all kinds of insidious shit on a global scale. This is all against the background of the canal being turned back to the Panamanians, about America dealing with Noriega, who was a narco-terrorist, and the CIA having dirty hands in all of South America and Central America. Gary was taking on a huge task by signing on to this movie. If he was going to get the facts right, he would need to go straight to the source, the CIA. And wouldn't you know it, that very same year, 1996, a man who'd spent 25 years in the clandestine agency as an undercover officer created a new position for himself, that of the CIA's official liaison to the entertainment industry. Someone from the inside who could inform productions about how the CIA should be portrayed on film.
Wow.
I.e. in a positive light and totally on the up and up.
The most amazing organization ever. That's doing the best things that anyone has ever heard of all the time, always.
Exactly. Someone who could make sure screenwriters depicted the role of the agency accurately, air quotes. That someone was not Chuck Barris. It was Chase Brandon, a man Gary had been friends with for 15 years, ever since they both took part in the wedding of Chase's cousin, Tommy Lee Jones. And that's where we're going to end part one. If I ended it at the point where I had originally wanted to, this would be like a 2-hour episode.
God.
So that's just that'll come in part two. But
part two. So we all have the backstory. We know all the key players, and with the CIA is now entering the picture.
Yes, and he's working on this new script. We're going to meet a lot of interesting characters. Your cheesecake guy is going to come into play next episode.
Ooh-wee.
So there's a lot coming. So part 2 is going to really focus on the mindset Gary was in and the work he was doing leading up to going to Santa Fe, where he went to complete his script. His drive back, his disappearance, and then the weird shit that happened after he went missing.
And he never got to make this movie, right?
No, he disappeared.
Right, because he disappeared. Just double checking.
Yeah, no, the movie did not get made. So that's where I'm going to leave you for this week. Let us know what you thought about this episode in the comments on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, or Spotify at
Horrorwood Podcast.
Or send us an email at
horrorwoodpodcast@gmail.com.
And if you have a little extra pocket change, be like Jessica. And pop on over to Patreon at
patreon.com/horrorwoodpodcast.
And if you're a member of the Podcast Academy, consider throwing us your vote for the Ambie Awards.
The Ambie Awards.
And we'll be back next week.
Holler.
Holler.